as a female from San Diego to Portland in a rental near the gas station. I was nearly the victim of possibly sex trafficking, maybe murder, maybe just the worst luck in the world while driving alone. Here is my story. In the dimming light of a late afternoon, I found myself driving alone on a seemingly endless stretch of highway. The journey from San Diego to Portland was supposed to be a simple one, a straight shot up the I-5. But as the shadows grew longer, the weight of solitude pressed heavily on me. Every horror story I'd ever heard about solo road trips began to play in my mind, making the journey feel more like a descent into a thriller novel. The road ahead was clear, but my fuel gauge told a different story. I needed to stop. A sign ahead promised a cluster of gas stations a few miles away, a beacon in the vast emptiness. As I pulled off the highway, the bustling activity of the gas stations was a welcome sight. Cars came and went, families stretched their legs, and the hum of conversation filled the air. It felt safe, a pocket of civilization in the middle of nowhere. I chose a spot away from the main pumps, wanting a moment to stretch and gather my thoughts before continuing. After refueling, I wandered inside the convenience store, picking up some snacks and a drink for the road. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the cashier gave me a nod as I paid. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. But as I returned to my car, a chill ran down my spine. The once busy gas station had quieted down, and the few remaining cars seemed to be watching me. Shaking off the feeling, I quickly got back on the road, eager to put some distance between me and the eerie silence. However, my relief was short-lived. About an hour into my drive, a warning light flashed on my dashboard. My tire pressure was dropping. Panic surged through me. The road was deserted, the shoulders soft and treacherous. Every horror story I'd ever heard screamed at me to keep driving, to not stop. Trusting my gut, I pressed on, praying for a sign of civilization. And then, like an answer to my prayers, a sign appeared, pointing to a small town just 9 miles ahead. Relief washed over me as I pulled into a Valero station next to what looked like an abandoned diner. But as I stepped out, the hissing sound of escaping air made my heart sink. My tire was flat. Determined not to let fear get the best of me, I decided to change the tire myself. But as I worked, a car pulled up beside me. 3 men, their faces obscured by the setting sun, offered to help. Their insistence felt more threatening than kind. I declined, my voice firm, trying to convey confidence I didn't feel. They lingered for a moment, their intentions unclear, before finally driving away. As I tightened the last lug nut on the spare tire, the weight of what might have been pressed heavily on me. The road ahead seemed darker, more treacherous. But I had no choice but to continue, hoping that the worst was behind me. With the donut tires securely in place, I knew I couldn't drive for long. The sun had set, and the world outside was now a tapestry of shadows and dim headlights. The small town I had stopped in offered little in terms of amenities, and I needed a more permanent solution. My mind raced, trying to recall any nearby cities. Sacramento. That was it. If I could make it there, surely I'd find a place to replace the tire. The drive was tense. Every sound from the car, every flicker in the rearview mirror, sent my heart racing. The earlier encounter with the 3 men had left me on edge, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. But I pressed on, the city lights of Sacramento growing brighter on the horizon. As I entered the city, a thought struck me. Walmart. They had auto centers, and even though it was a Sunday, there was a chance they might still be open. I quickly searched for the nearest location and, to my relief, found one that was closing in just under half an hour. I sped up, hoping to make it in time. Pulling into the Walmart parking lot, I was greeted by the familiar sight of the retail giant. The auto center was still open, and an elderly mechanic was finishing up for the day. I quickly explained my situation, emphasizing the urgency. He nodded understandingly and got to work. But what he found next sent chills down my spine. Returning from the garage, he held a pair of pliers, and between them was a box blade. The kind you'd find in a utility knife. He explained that the way it was lodged in my tire, it couldn't have been an accident. Someone had intentionally done this. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Those men at the gas station, the eerie feeling of being watched, it all made sense now. I had been targeted. The mechanic's face was etched with genuine concern. "You should be careful," he warned. "There have been stories about this stretch of highway. People being followed, cars sabotaged." His words echoed my darkest fears. He suggested I take a drive around the area, checking my rearview mirror for any suspicious followers. If anything seemed off, I was to return immediately, honk, and he would come out to assist. With a deep breath, I got back into my car, my senses heightened. I drove around the block, taking random turns, trying to see if anyone was tailing me. The streets were dimly lit, and every shadow seemed to move, every car seemed to be lurking. But after what felt like hours, I saw no signs of being followed. Maybe, just maybe, I had evaded whatever danger had been lurking. I returned to the highway, the dark expanse stretching out before me. The earlier adrenaline rush had left me exhausted, but fear kept me alert. Every mile marker I passed felt like a small victory, bringing me closer to home and further from the nightmare I had narrowly escaped. The early morning sun began to light up the horizon as I finally pulled into my driveway. The familiar surroundings brought a wave of relief, but the weight of the night's events still hung heavily. I realized that no matter how strong or independent one might feel, danger could lurk around any corner. My tattoos and height might have given me a sense of invincibility, but that night had shattered it. I made a mental note to always trust my instincts and be cautious, especially when traveling alone. And as for that rental company, I would definitely have a few choice words about their lack of a full-size spare and their so-called extended roadside assistance. But for now, all I wanted was the safety and comfort of my own bed. I was almost robbed and stabbed while my little adventure for snack to the gas station. Here is my story. The clock had just struck 4 a.m. The night was young, and my stomach growled with a hunger that only a late-night snack could satiate. The neon lights of the gas station beckoned me like a moth to a flame. I'd pulled into the dimly lit parking lot, the hum of the overhead lights mixing with the distant chirping of crickets. The gas station stood as an isolated beacon in the midst of the enveloping darkness. The night was unusually quiet, with only the soft rustling of leaves to break the silence. The air was cool, carrying with it the scent of impending rain. Inside, the gas station was eerily empty, save for the lone clerk who seemed lost in a magazine. I grabbed a hot dog, its warmth oddly comforting, and a bag of chips. The fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows on the linoleum floor, making the familiar seem foreign. I paid, nodding to the clerk, and made my way back to my car. Settling into the driver's seat, I turned on the music, letting the soft melodies fill the space. The night was pleasantly cool, so I rolled down the window just a bit, letting the gentle breeze play with the strands of my hair. The world outside seemed distant, muffled by the cocoon of my car and the music. I took a bite of the hot dog, savoring the simple pleasure of the moment. But that serenity was short-lived. A sudden tap on my window jolted me from my reverie. My heart raced as I turned to see a shadowy figure looming outside. The dim light from the gas station barely illuminated his face, but his eyes, those eyes bore into me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Instinctively, I locked the door. Lowering the window just a fraction, I mustered the courage to ask, "Can I help you?" His voice, cold and raspy, sent a chill through me. "Get out of the car, kid." I blinked in confusion. "Excuse me?" He tapped on the window again, but this time, the glint of a knife caught the faint light. My heart threatened to burst from my chest. The parking lot, which had seemed so benign moments ago, now felt like a trap. There was no one else around, no other cars, no witnesses. The world seemed to close in on me, the weight of the darkness pressing from all sides. The soft hum of the music now felt like a distant echo, drowned out by the pounding of my heart. The adrenaline coursing through my veins sharpened my senses. Every sound, every movement became amplified. The man's frustrated grunts, the thud of his hand against the car door, the distant hum of the gas station lights. My mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. "Come on, kid! Don't make this harder than it has to be," he spat, his voice tinged with desperation. I had to think fast. The car's engine was still running, the soft purr now sounding like a lifeline. "All right, just give me a moment," I stammered, trying to sound as if I was on the verge of giving in. But as he momentarily relaxed his stance, I seized my chance. Slamming my foot on the accelerator, I threw the car into reverse. The tires screeched against the asphalt, and the sudden movement caught him off guard. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with surprise. I didn't wait to see his reaction. Shifting gears, I sped out of the parking lot, the man's enraged shouts fading into the distance. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of him, knife still in hand, chasing after me for a few futile steps before giving up. As I put distance between myself and the gas station, I noticed the clerk inside, phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of concern. As I sped past, I couldn't help but raise my middle finger in defiance, a gesture aimed not just at the knife-wielding maniac but at the terror he had instilled in me. The drive home felt like an eternity. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every sound a reminder of the danger I had narrowly escaped. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the familiar surroundings of my home offered a stark contrast to the night's events. The safety of its walls felt like a haven. Once inside, I locked all the doors and sank into a chair, trying to process everything. The weight of the ordeal pressed heavily on me, and my hands trembled as I dialed the police. The voice on the other end was calm and reassuring, a stark contrast to the chaos of my emotions. I relayed the events, my voice occasionally breaking as I recounted the terror of the encounter. The officer listened patiently, taking down every detail. "We received a call from the gas station clerk about the same incident," he informed me. "With both your statements, we have a solid description of the assailant. We'll do everything we can to apprehend him." Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The incident at the gas station became a story I recounted to friends and family, each telling making it feel a little more distant, a little less real. But the scar on my car's window remained, a tangible reminder of that fateful night. I never did hear from the police about the man with the knife. Whether he was caught or continued to lurk in the shadows, I couldn't say. But the experience changed me. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the unexpected dangers that can lurk around any corner. But it also taught me about the strength that can be found within, the will to survive, and the importance of always being vigilant. I was trapped in the town near gas station. Here is my story. Turn back. The wind howled, carrying with it a whisper that seemed to echo from the very depths of the earth, but I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination. I was on a mission, a scenic drive through the Midwest, with the majestic faces of Mt. Rushmore as my destination. Desperation drove me forward, the gas needle inching closer to empty with every passing mile. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a weathered sign emerged from the gloom. "Hillside 5 miles." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I drove closer, the whispering wind grew louder, more insistent. "Turn back," it hissed, but I was too focused on refueling to heed its warning. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, a dilapidated structure with a single pump that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The absence of a credit card input was the least of my worries. The adjacent service hut, with its boarded-up windows and peeling paint, seemed to have been abandoned for years. The wind continued its relentless whisper, now accompanied by a low, mournful moan. Ignoring the growing dread, I decided to venture into the service hut, hoping to find someone who could help. But as I approached, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a pitch-black interior. The wind's whispers grew louder, more frantic. "Turn back," it screamed. But it was too late. The door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the chilling realization that the whispers weren't coming from the wind. They were coming from inside the hut. Emerging from the suffocating darkness of the hut, I found myself back outside, the gas station now bathed in an eerie moonlight. The town of Hillside, once seemingly deserted, now took on a more sinister demeanor. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant howl of the wind and the rapid beating of my heart. I tried to shake off the paralyzing fear, reminding myself that I needed fuel. But as I approached my car, I noticed something that sent shivers down my spine. The few parked cars that I had seen earlier now had faint silhouettes seated inside, unmoving, their faces obscured by the shadows. They weren't there before, or had I just not noticed? Desperation drove me to act. I decided to try my luck at another gas station, if there was one. But as I drove down the main street of Hillside, the scene grew even more unsettling. Boarded-up windows stared back at me like lifeless eyes, and the empty stores seemed to hold the memories of a time long forgotten. The wind's whispers returned, now a cacophony of voices, each more desperate than the last. "Leave! Leave while you still can!" But then, a faint glimmer of light caught my eye. Another gas station, this one seemingly operational. But as I pulled closer, my heart sank. The pump, though newer, had no credit card input. Beside it stood a service shack, its door slightly ajar, revealing an interior as dark and foreboding as the first. I hesitated, the memories of the previous hut still fresh in my mind. But the need for fuel and the desire to leave this cursed town overpowered my fear. I approached the shack, the whispers growing louder with each step. As I reached for the door, it swung open, revealing not darkness, but a figure. An old man, his skin pale and eyes milky white, stood staring at me. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice echoing the warnings of the wind. I stammered, asking about fuel, but he simply shook his head. "There's no leaving Hillside," he whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was trapped in a town that didn't want to let go, with no way out. The whispers, the warnings, they all made sense now. Hillside wasn't just a town, it was a prison, and I was its latest inmate. The weight of the old man's words bore down on me, but the immediate needs of my wife brought me back to the present. She had been silent throughout our eerie encounters, but now, her voice trembled with urgency. "I need to find a restroom," she whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. We decided to venture further into the heart of Hillside, hoping to find a public facility. The post office seemed like a logical choice. Its brick facade, though worn by time, seemed more inviting than the other dilapidated structures. But as we approached, a sign on the door read, "Closed. Return at dawn." We had missed its operating hours by mere minutes. Despair threatened to engulf us, but then, a faint glimmer of light caught my eye. Down the street, a shop stood out from the rest. Its window was shattered, replaced by a makeshift plywood door. As we drew closer, the door creaked open, and two figures emerged, clutching bags that seemed to contain provisions. Their eyes, hollow and devoid of emotion, fixed on us, sending a chill down my spine. Swallowing my fear, I approached the shop. The interior was a stark contrast to the outside. Narrow aisles, dimly lit by flickering bulbs, were lined with dusty shelves, most of them empty. But what truly caught my attention was the man behind the counter. Towering and broad-shouldered, he wore stained overalls and a trucker hat that cast a shadow over his eyes. His presence was menacing, and he looked as though he had been ripped straight from the pages of a horror novel. Gathering my courage, I asked about a restroom. The man's response was slow, almost deliberate. He seemed to struggle with my request, forcing me to repeat it multiple times. When he finally understood, his voice, thick with a country drawl, directed us to the back of the store. But his instructions were oddly detailed, warning of obstacles we might encounter, like scattered boxes and low supplies. With trepidation, we made our way to the back, maneuvering around the clutter. The restroom door creaked open to reveal a sight that made my stomach churn. Mold covered the walls, and a mysterious puddle glistened on the floor. Empty toilet paper rolls littered the area, and as my wife stepped in, a group of roaches scuttled away into the shadows. She hesitated, her face pale, but the urgency of her situation forced her to brave the unsanitary conditions. As she closed the door behind her, I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being watched. The storekeeper's gaze bore into me, unblinking, as the whispers returned, growing louder and more insistent. "You should have listened. You should have left." The minutes my wife spent in that restroom felt like hours. The store's atmosphere grew thicker, more oppressive. Every creak of the wooden floorboards, every flicker of the dim lights heightened my sense of dread. I tried to distract myself by browsing the sparse shelves, but my eyes kept being drawn back to the storekeeper. He continued to watch me, his gaze never wavering, his expression unreadable. In an attempt to break the tension, I reached for a bottle of water from a nearby shelf. It was covered in a layer of dust, and the label was faded, but it seemed intact. I figured making a purchase might ease the palpable tension between the storekeeper and me. Besides, it was an unspoken rule I had always followed. If I used the store's facilities, I would buy something in return. The sound of the restroom door creaking open was a welcome relief. My wife emerged, her face a shade paler, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and fear. Without a word, we made our way to the counter. The storekeeper's eyes followed our every move. As I placed the bottle on the counter, he finally broke his silence. "Did you find everything all right?" he asked, his voice dripping with a mock concern that didn't reach his eyes. I nodded, handing him a few crumpled bills. The transaction was painfully slow, each second stretching out, amplifying the unease in the room. With the bottle in hand, we made our way to the exit. The plywood door seemed heavier now, as if the very town was trying to keep us in. As it swung open, the cold night air hit us, and for a moment, the weight of Hillside's oppressive atmosphere lifted. But that fleeting sense of relief was shattered when we stepped outside. Across the street, a group of townsfolk had gathered. Their conversation ceased the moment they saw us, their faces turning in unison to stare. Their expressions were blank, emotionless, but their intent was clear. We weren't welcome. Quickening our pace, we headed for our car. The whispers returned, now a deafening roar in my ears. "You should never have come. Hillside will never let you leave." The words echoed, intertwining with my own racing thoughts. We had to get out, and we had to do it now. As we neared our car, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The once deserted gas station we had first stopped at was now illuminated, its single pump occupied by a vehicle. The car, an old rusted sedan, was being refueled by a figure draped in shadows. The sight was inexplicable, given the station's earlier appearance of abandonment. I fumbled for the car keys, my hands shaking. My wife, sensing the urgency, quickly climbed into the passenger seat. The engine roared to life, its sound cutting through the eerie silence of Hillside. As I shifted into drive, I chanced a glance at the gathering across the street. They remained still, their collective gaze fixed on us, watching our every move. The car tires screeched as I sped away, desperate to put as much distance between us and Hillside as possible. The town's buildings became a blur, and the haunting whispers began to fade, replaced by the comforting hum of the engine and the rush of the wind. But as we left the town's boundaries, a dense fog rolled in, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The road ahead was barely discernible, and the once familiar landmarks of the Midwest became twisted shadows in the mist. The journey became a disorienting maze, and a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Were we truly escaping, or was this another of Hillside's tricks? Hours seemed to pass, the fog growing thicker with each mile. Doubt and fear threatened to overwhelm me. But then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the fog lifted, revealing a clear road ahead. The familiar signs of the highway greeted us, and the lights of a distant town twinkled on the horizon. We didn't speak for a long time, the events of the night too raw, too fresh. But as the first rays of dawn broke, casting away the remnants of the night's horrors, a collective sigh of relief escaped our lips. We had escaped the clutches of Hillside. However, the scars of that night remained. To this day, we avoid the backroads of the Midwest, fearing that we might once again come across that cursed town. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when all is silent, I can still hear the faintest of whispers, a chilling reminder of the town that almost claimed us.